Mr. President,
Senator from Texas.
The senator from Oregon, I guess, demonstrates the principle that hypocrisy is the tribute that vice pays to virtue. Because the senator from Oregon suggests that somehow payments to people who are not criminals will be delayed if we don't pay criminals in prison. That claim on the face of it is absurd. The federal prisons are administered by the Bureau of Prisons. Government may not be good at everything, but I feel quite confident the federal government can produce a list of currently incarcerated prisons. I know the states can. The IRS, likewise, is perfectly capable of recognizing whether it is mailing checks to prisoners in prison. This is not whether you've ever been convicted of a crime. It is, are you sending the check to Sing Sing? If so, don't send it. The claim that somehow Joe Sixpack at home is not getting his check because we don't want to send checks to prisoners is demonstrably untrue. Senator from Oregon also claims Republicans oppose stimulus checks when he knows that is simply not the case. As he noted, this body overwhelmingly passed bipartisan COVID relief 5 times last year. It is only when Senate Democrats took the majority that bipartisan legislation ended because the Democrats decided to push a hard partisan bill instead. A clean bill providing relief checks would have passed with an overwhelming bipartisan majority in this body, and the senator from Oregon knows that. We've now discovered, though, that given a straight-up choice between sending checks to criminals in prison versus sending checks to the victims of crime, Senate Democrats stand with the criminals. I'm going to suggest an even narrower situation. Perhaps we can't agree on victims of crime. How about murderers? We just had a hearing in the Senate Judiciary Committee on gun violence. We saw a horrific mass murder in Colorado. Can't we agree that murderers shouldn't get checks, $1,400 stimulus checks from the taxpayers? Let's take the money going to murderers and put it in the Crime Victims Task Force Fund instead. And so, Mr. President, as if in legislative session, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of S-929, introduced earlier today. I further ask that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection? Senator from Oregon.
Reserving the right to object.
Senator is recognized.
Thank you very much. Mr. President, there isn't information about this crime or these crimes at the federal, state, and local level. So again, we're back in exactly the same place. The senator from Texas wants to hold up the checks to millions and millions of people, in spite of the fact that he voted earlier for a system that got the checks to everybody in a timely way. And when you don't have the information about the specific crimes at the federal, state, and local level, it becomes impossible to carry out what the senator from Texas seeks to do. And the net effect is, again, millions and millions of Americans aren't getting the funds that they need to pay for essentials, rent, and groceries. I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President.
Senator from Texas.
You know, it can be hard in these partisan days to know what the truth is. Both sides yell at each other. They insult each other. It's hard to know who's telling the truth. I ask the folks at home who are listening to this debate to exercise a little bit of common sense. The senator from Oregon just told you the federal government has no idea who are murderers currently in prison. I'm going to suggest that doesn't make any sense. I feel quite confident the Department of Justice could produce a list of currently incarcerated murderers in federal prison within 24 hours. I'm absolutely certain the state of Texas could produce that list. I'm confident the state of Connecticut could produce the list of the murderers currently in Connecticut prisons. I'm even confident the state of Oregon could produce a list of the murderers convicted of homicide currently incarcerated in the state of Oregon. The claim that we don't know who the murderers are who are in our prisons serving time for murder, it doesn't pass the laugh test. So let's see if we could agree in a different area. Rapists, those who committed sexual assault. Again, these are public records that the Department of Justice and every state criminal justice authority has a list of all the rapists. How about let's not send $1,400 checks to rapists, take the money and give it to the Crime Victims Fund so it can go to victims of rape. Here's a choice for Democrats. Do you want to send money to the rapists or the victims of sexual assault? This ought to be a 100-0 choice. Mr. President, as if in legislative session, I ask for unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of S. 930, introduced earlier today. I further ask that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Reserving the right to object.
Senator from Oregon.
Mr. President, I want to read specifically what the IRS has told us, because I gather my colleague would like to just continue this for some time, but here's what the IRS says. In the information the IRS receives from the Bureau of Prison and state prison systems, we do not get the crime for which the person is incarcerated. So we can have a host more of these amendments if my colleague wants to do it, but I get why he is so anxious to have his amendment passed, because he was always for keeping people from getting checks, and his amendment, if passed, would put those checks on hold. So that is why I've objected, and we will put this into the record as well, Mr. President. I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President, once again, the senator from Oregon has said something that is demonstrably false and that he knows is false, which is he has suggested that I oppose sending stimulus checks to the American citizens, to law-abiding citizens. I not only didn't oppose it, I voted for it. Republicans supported it. He knows that. That is a red herring. He just read a statement from the IRS agency saying they get a list of prisoners from the Bureau of Prisons, and he said, but we don't know the crime. Mr. President, the first unanimous consent request I put before this body is everyone on that list in the Bureau of Prisons, don't send them a check. That doesn't delay your check. If you're not looking at bars, if you're not in a jail cell that is 5 feet by 10 feet, this doesn't affect you. This only affects criminals currently in prison. Let's try one more time. The Democrats have objected to not sending checks to criminals in prison. The Democrats have objected to not sending checks to murderers in prison. The Democrats have objected to not sending checks to rapists in prison. Let's try a group that I think may be the lowest of the low, which is child molesters. I spend a lot of years in law enforcement, and I think there is no more horrific offense than those who commit crimes of violence and sexual assault against kids. When I was Solicitor General of Texas, the cases where people sexually abused kids, I thought should be in Dante's ninth circle of hell. So here's a chance for some bipartisan agreement. Can't we all agree that the federal government shouldn't send $1,400 checks to the child molesters in prison right now for molesting kids? And before the senator of Oregon says, who knows who the child molesters are? Well, the Department of Justice and every state Department of Justice knows who the child molesters are in their prisons. Let's take the money that the Democrats want to send to child molesters, and let's take it from the child molesters and give it to the victims of crimes, the kids who have been molested. This is as simple a legislative choice as I can imagine. Mr. President, as if in legislative session, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of S. 931, introduced earlier today. I further ask that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object, Mr. President.
The senator from Oregon.
Once again, Mr. President, our colleague from Texas is offering an idea that would disrupt the system in a way that would keep millions and millions of Americans who are hurting from getting help in a timely way. He has come back with essentially one version after another because he thinks that somehow this is the kind of sensational idea that will cause people to rally to his side. I believe what he has been proposing, now I gather 4 times, is so disruptive, so unworkable, that it is going to hurt the millions of people who this Congress wanted to help. And that is what the senator from Texas has sought to do from the very beginning. I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President, there's an old saying that you don't learn anything from the second kick of a mule. The first time the senator from Oregon said that I sought to disrupt stimulus payments, perhaps he did so because he didn't know my views on that topic. But he has since been corrected that I voted for stimulus payments to American citizens in the time of economic crisis and didn't oppose them. So he's now repeatedly stating falsehoods, knowing that they are false. You know, all of us were there when Joe Biden gave his inauguration speech making a call to unity, making a call to healing. And there was a chance we could have done that. On COVID relief, you don't have to ask theoretically. Last year, when Republicans had control of the Senate, we passed 5 bipartisan COVID relief bills, coming together with overwhelming bipartisan majorities. The Democrats decided when they took control, they didn't want to do that. You want to know just how far out of touch and how radical today's Democratic Party is. We have seen the Democrats now say we will send taxpayer stimulus checks to millions of illegal immigrants. We have seen Democrats say we will send the taxpayer stimulus to criminals in prison. We have seen the Democrats say we will send the taxpayer stimulus checks to murderers in prison. We have seen them say we will send the checks to rapists in prison, and we now just saw them say we will send the checks to child molesters in prison. It should be the essence of common sense to say, don't give this money to violent criminals, give it to victims of crime instead. In a sane world, that would be a 100-0 proposition. I challenge any one of you in the brightest of blue states, go home and explain to your constituents that you refused to take the money from child molesters and give it to the victims of that crime. That is the position of every Democrat in this chamber, because every single Democratic senator was the deciding vote rejecting the amendment on the floor. It is unfortunate just how extreme the hard left is right now. But it is far out of touch with the American people. And it has long abandoned any semblance of common sense. I yield the floor.
Senator from Oregon.
Here's what we're for. We're for making sure that needy people get help to make pay for groceries, make rent, rather than have one of our colleagues come out with something that is unworkable and disruptive and is going to keep those people from getting help. That's what this debate is all about. Something that is unworkable. I read the direct comment from the IRS with respect to not having the information or getting help to people who are hurting. I yield.
Senator from Texas.
The senator from Oregon suggested the concern of the Democrats is to get taxpayer funds to needy people. People currently incarcerated are not needy. Senator from Oregon said we need to help Americans struggling with rent. You know what? People currently incarcerated pay 0 in rent. They don't have rent costs. So the argument of the Democrats is we don't know who the criminals are who are currently in jail. That does not comport with reality. And any fair-minded person watching this knows that. I yield the floor.
President.
The senator